It was one of those days that felt like it was going to be ordinary. The kind of day where people rushed to work, stood in line for coffee, and forgot what they had for breakfast by noon. But on a quiet street in Los Angeles, under a sky that couldn't decide whether to shine or pour, something happened that would shake the internet and rewrite a few reputations forever. Marcus Reed, a young black teen, had just finished his shift at the local bookstore. At only 17, he carried a calmness in his eyes that came from being raised by a single mother who believed in hard work, respect, and doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. He had dreams bigger than his small neighborhood. Dreams of college, of becoming a writer, of one day telling stories that mattered. He always kept a small notebook in his back pocket, scribbling lines of poetry or scenes for a story that lived only in his head. That afternoon, the bus he boarded was crowded, the kind of crowded where people pretended not to see each other. But Marcus saw her, an exhausted pregnant woman holding her belly and leaning against the metal pole, her face pale and tired. Without a second thought, he stood up and offered his seat with a shy smile. She looked surprised at first, then smiled back softly and sat down with a whispered, "Thank you." A moment so small, it should have gone unnoticed. But it didn't. The woman reached into her purse and scribbled something quickly on a small card. As she handed it to Marcus, her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Please read this later," she said. Marcus nodded, tucking the card into his pocket without looking at it. At that same moment, not far from that bus route, another story was unfolding. A very different kind of story. A high-end black SUV was pulled over in the quiet hills, just blocks away from a private studio, where celebrities often gathered away from flashing cameras. Inside that SUV was a man known only to a few by his real name, Jasper Monroe. But to the world, he was a media giant, a powerful figure in the showbiz industry. He produced the kind of blockbuster hits that could crash streaming sites on release. His influence stretched from Hollywood to Capitol Hill, but to any stranger on the street, he was just another black man in a luxury car. That's exactly how Officer R. Blake saw him. The officer had followed the SUV for 2 blocks, claiming it had tinted windows darker than regulation. But when Jasper calmly rolled down the window and asked if there was a problem, things took a sharp turn. Officer Blake's voice was already raised, hand already on his holster, heart already filled with a judgment he didn't question. He shouted for Jasper to step out of the vehicle. Jasper remained calm, asking for clarification, stating clearly that he had done nothing wrong. Then came the moment that would turn the world's eyes to a single street in Los Angeles. With no warning, no reason, and no threat, the officer drew his gun. Jasper's hands were still on the steering wheel. No sudden movements, no attitude, just a man frozen, unarmed, and aware that his next breath depended on someone else's judgment. A nearby pedestrian began filming. Another called 911, reporting the incident not as a traffic stop, but as a cop pulling a gun on a man who isn't doing anything. More phones came out. People started gathering, and yet, the officer didn't back down. His voice cracked with tension, barking orders that made no sense. "Hands up," he yelled again, even though Jasper's hands hadn't moved. "Get out slowly. Don't make me shoot." The crowd watched in disbelief, some whispering the names of other black men who never made it home after moments. Just like this. But before anyone could intervene, a sleek black car pulled up from behind, braking hard. The door flew open, and a woman stepped out. Tall, commanding, dressed in dark sunglasses and a designer coat. Her heels clicked against the pavement like punctuation marks. She didn't shout. She didn't panic. She simply said, "Officer Blake, put your weapon down, now." He turned, startled, unsure of who she was. But within seconds, recognition dawned on his face, and fear replaced arrogance. Her name was Olivia Grant, and though most of the world knew her as a former actress turned director, insiders knew she was also one of the board members of the Los Angeles Law Enforcement Oversight Committee. A quiet powerhouse, She wasn't. Just showbiz royalty. She had deep ties to city leadership, and this, what she was witnessing, was going to cost someone everything. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars pulled up. The officer was asked to step aside. Jasper finally stepped out, calm but visibly shaken, shielding his face from the cameras now arriving. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. News spread like wildfire. By sundown, the video had gone viral. Millions had already watched it. Hashtags were flooding the internet. Comment sections were exploding. Calls were coming in from city officials, journalists, activists, and even international news agencies. This wasn't just another viral clip. This was a window into a much bigger problem. And this time, the man at the center of it wasn't powerless. Back on the bus, Marcus finally unfolded the card the woman had handed him earlier. The handwriting was elegant, almost delicate. It read, "You have no idea how much that simple gesture meant to me. I've had a hard week, but you reminded me that there's still kindness in the world. I work in publishing. If you're ever ready to share your writing with the world, email me." She had left her name and contact. Marcus blinked at the card. Then again, and then looked up stunned. He recognized the name. She was a senior editor at one of the top publishing houses in New York. On the same day that a racist police officer tried to humiliate a powerful black man on the street. A quiet teenager's kindness opened the door to his future. But this story doesn't end here, because what happened next would connect these 2 worlds. Marcus, the quiet teen with a poet's soul, and Jasper, the showbiz king nearly gunned. Down in broad daylight, their paths would cross in a way neither could have predicted, and the consequences would ripple across cities, headlines, and hearts. The fired officer would not go quietly, and Marcus's life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But as the sun set over Los Angeles that night, 2 things were certain. Justice had only just begun. And sometimes, one small act of kindness is the spark that sets everything in motion. The night air in Los Angeles was thick with noise. Sirens in the distance, camera flashes, and a storm of news trucks parking in rows along the block. But inside his apartment, Marcus sat quietly on the edge of his bed, staring at the small card in his hands. The woman on the bus had signed her name, Danielle Rowan. He remembered it clearly now. He had seen her in a magazine once, maybe in a school library article about powerful women in publishing. She was one of the people responsible for bringing some of the biggest names in literature into the spotlight. And now, she had given him her contact. Not just a thank you. It was a chance. A real one. But he didn't know if he had the courage to take it. His mother peeked into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel. "You all right, baby?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She stepped in, noticing the card. "What's that?" He hesitated. "Someone I helped today gave me her name. Said she works in publishing." She raised an eyebrow. And she said I could send her my writing." Her face softened. She came closer and put her hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you let the world read what's been living in that notebook of yours." Marcus looked down, his fingers curling around the edges of the card. "What if they don't think I'm good enough?" She smiled gently. "You let them decide that. You just be brave enough to try." Across town, Jasper Monroe stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a tumbler of untouched whiskey in his hand. He didn't drink often, not out of discipline, but because he liked to keep his senses sharp. Tonight, though, he needed something to steady his thoughts. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing for hours. Calls from legal teams, PR reps, producers, friends, some scared, some angry, some already trying to spin the story. But Jasper hadn't answered a single one. He wasn't interested in the headlines or the drama. All he could think about was that gun, just inches away, pointed at his face. The whole thing kept replaying in his mind. The officer's shaking hand, the way time seemed to freeze, how calm he forced himself to be, even when his heart was pounding so loud he could barely hear. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, but he felt it. The shame, the rage, the bone-deep exhaustion of being seen as a threat in his own city. Despite all the power he had earned, despite the awards, the suits, the fame, none of it had mattered in that moment. He had just been another black man in a car, and if Olivia hadn't shown up when she did, he set the glass down, untouched. His jaw clenched. This wasn't over. It couldn't be, because that cop, Blake, hadn't just pulled a weapon. He had pulled the thread on something bigger, something that had been boiling under the surface of Jasper's world for years. The whispers in boardrooms, the silent glances at events, the assumption that his money made him acceptable, but never truly safe. And now the world had seen it. The studio sent over a draft statement, full of soft language and deflection. Jasper deleted it without reading past the first paragraph. He wasn't going to be quiet, but he also wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. Meanwhile, Officer R. Blake sat in a cold room at the precinct, a supervisor seated across from him, flipping through printed screenshots from social media. The videos, the comments, the mounting pressure. Every second that passed, the walls closed in tighter. His badge had already been taken. He hadn't been fired yet, but that was only a matter of hours now. His face was pale, the confidence long gone. "It wasn't what it looked like," he muttered. The supervisor didn't respond. "I thought the guy was reaching for something." "He wasn't," the supervisor replied flatly. "We have 5 different camera angles now." He sat still the entire time. Didn't move. Didn't argue. "You escalated without cause." Blake swallowed hard. He was driving a black SUV in a high-end neighborhood. Tinted windows. Suspicious. Suspicious? The supervisor leaned forward. "Do you even know who that man is?" Blake didn't answer. He didn't want to admit it. The room fell into a thick silence before the supervisor added, "You just pointed a loaded weapon at one of the most powerful men in American entertainment. Do you understand what kind of fallout is coming?" Blake clenched his jaw. "I did what I was trained to do." "No," the supervisor snapped. "You did what you chose to do, and now you're going to face the consequences." But even as those consequences loomed, something deeper was building. Online, thousands of comments poured in. People from across the country watched the video and shared their stories. Some were outraged, some were heartbroken, and some were afraid, because they saw themselves in Jasper's shoes. Activists picked up the story. Talk shows booked panels. Late-night hosts were already writing monologues. But the public didn't just want awareness. They wanted accountability. Back in his room, Marcus stared at the blank screen of his laptop. The card sat next to him, his notebook open. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then slowly, he began to type. Not a full story, just a note. An introduction. A paragraph about what had happened on the bus that day. About kindness, about fear. About choosing to see people as humans, not headlines. He didn't even realize the tears in his eyes until one dropped onto the keyboard. Somewhere deep down, something was shifting. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. Across the city, Danielle Rowan sat in her home office, rewatching the bus footage she had captured on her phone. She hadn't posted it. She hadn't planned to. But she had filmed Marcus giving up his seat and smiling at her with such gentle grace. She had filmed it because it reminded her of something. Her own son, who had passed away just 2 years before. Marcus looked about his age, and in that simple moment, he reminded her of the world she hoped her son would have helped create. She looked at her inbox. No email from Marcus yet, but she could wait. Because sometimes, she thought, people don't realize how strong they are until someone sees the goodness in them. And Marcus, whether he knew it or not, had already started something bigger than he could imagine. But what none of them knew, not Danielle, not Marcus, not Jasper, was that the story wasn't done yet, not even close, because someone else had seen the video, someone who didn't like what it showed. And somewhere in a quiet office, a hand hovered over a keyboard, preparing to type a message that would twist the truth and ignite a storm.